in the sprawling expanse of the Outer Rim territories, where star traders and smugglers gather to exchange everything from rare minerals to exotic creatures, most beings have learned to mind their own business. The unwritten rule of Nexus Station is simple. Don't ask questions, don't offer help unless paid, and never get emotionally involved in someone else's problems. But humans have always been terrible at following the rules. When Jake Morrison, a grease-stained mechanic from Earth's industrial districts, witnesses something that makes his blood boil in the shadowy corners of an alien marketplace, he's about to discover that sometimes one person's refusal to look away can change the course of an entire species' future. What starts as a simple act of human stubbornness in defending the defenseless will spiral into a galactic incident that forces the universe to confront a truth they've long ignored. That strength isn't always about claws and fangs, and that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy might just be a human who's decided that something is wrong. This is the story of how one mechanic's wrench became mightier than an entire alien empire's sword, and how an abandoned creature became the catalyst for humanity's most unexpected alliance. Jake Morrison wiped the hydraulic fluid from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades, squinting at the massive cargo hauler suspended above his head in the repair bay. The ship belonged to a Corellian freight captain who'd blown 3 primary thruster housings trying to outrun a customs patrol, and now the alien was breathing down Jake's neck every 5 minutes, clicking his mandibles in that annoying way Corellians did when they were stressed. "How much longer, human?" Captain Vexter clicked, his 4 arms crossed in an impressive display of impatience. "My cargo spoils if we delay much more." Jake didn't look down from his work. "Same answer as 5 minutes ago, Captain. 2 hours, maybe 3 if you keep interrupting me." He adjusted his position on the lift platform, reaching for a plasma wrench. "Unless you want to explain to your buyers why their exotic spices taste like thruster exhaust." The Corellian chittered something that probably wasn't complimentary in his native tongue, but he stalked away, leaving Jake in blessed silence. Nexus Station's repair bay wasn't exactly quiet, with the constant hum of machinery and the chatter of dozens of different species conducting business, but it was peaceful enough for Jake to focus on his work. He'd been on Nexus Station for 3 years now, ever since he'd gotten tired of the corporate bureaucracy back on Earth, and decided that fixing alien ships paid better than fixing human ones. The Outer Rim territories were a frontier in every sense of the word, a place where someone with good hands and a willingness to work could make a decent living without too many questions asked. Jake had always been good with his hands. Growing up in Detroit's industrial sector, he'd learned to fix things out of necessity. When the automated factories started breaking down and nobody could afford the corporate repair teams, people like Jake's father had kept the machines running with ingenuity, stubbornness, and a healthy disrespect for manufacturer warranties. Jake had inherited all 3 traits, along with his father's weathered toolbox and his mother's inability to walk away from someone in trouble. That last trait was about to cause him more problems than he could imagine. The lift platform shuddered slightly as Jake tightened the last housing bolt. He was just starting to lower himself down when he heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze in his veins. It was a whimper, high and frightened, the kind of sound that bypassed the brain entirely and went straight to the heart. Jake paused, listening. The repair bay was full of strange noises, but this was different. This was the sound of something small and helpless in pain. He lowered the platform faster, jumping off before it reached the ground, and followed the sound toward the back of the bay where the salvage dealers kept their more questionable merchandise. What he saw there made his hands clench into fists. 3 Zephyrian traders, their scaled hides gleaming under the harsh station lights, had cornered something against a stack of metal crates. Zephyrians were predators by evolution, tall and lean with razor-sharp claws and teeth designed for tearing flesh. They were also notoriously cruel, especially to creatures they considered beneath them. "Worthless albino freak," one of them was hissing in accented standard. "Should have drowned it with the rest of the defective litter." "The buyer specifically wanted an exotic specimen," another replied, prodding at something with the tip of his boot. "This thing is too weak to survive transport. We'll be lucky to get salvage value for its hide." Jake stepped closer, and his heart nearly stopped. Huddled against the crates was a creature no bigger than a medium-sized dog, covered in pure white fur that was matted with blood and grime. It looked like nothing he'd ever seen before, with features that seemed to combine the best traits of several species. Its face was almost canine, but more intelligent, with large eyes that were a startling shade of violet. Despite its obvious injuries and terror, there was something unmistakably noble about the creature, a dignity that the Zephyrian's cruelty couldn't touch. "Please," the creature whispered in a voice barely audible above the station's ambient noise. It was speaking standard, Jake realized with a shock. This wasn't just some animal. This was a sentient being. "Please, I'll work, I'll earn my keep. Don't sell me to the paying merchants." The largest Zephyrian laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Work? Look at you, albino freak. You can barely stand. The only work you're good for is screaming for the entertainment of others." That was when Jake's carefully maintained neutrality evaporated like atmosphere from a breached hull. "Hey," he called out, stepping into the circle of light cast by the overhead lamps. "What's going on here?" The three Zephyrians turned to face him, their predatory instincts immediately triggered by the interruption. The largest one, who seemed to be the leader, bared his fangs in what might have been a smile on a less dangerous creature. "Move along, human," the Zephyrian growled. "This is Zephyrian business. Your kind has no authority here." Jake took another step forward, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma cutter hanging from his tool belt. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it would make a decent impression on organic tissue. "Actually, this is a neutral station, which means everyone's business is everyone's business. And right now, I'm making this my business." "Jake Morrison, isn't it?" The second Zephyrian spoke up, his yellow eyes narrowing. "The human mechanic. I've heard of you. You fix ships, nothing more. You're not a fighter, not security, not law enforcement. You're just a grease monkey who should know better than to interfere with his betters." "Funny thing about us grease monkeys," Jake replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "We're real good at taking things apart. Usually we put them back together afterward, but I'm feeling flexible about that part." The albino creature's violet eyes locked onto Jake's, and he saw something there that hit him like a plasma bolt to the chest. Hope. This being, whatever it was looking at him with desperate hope, as if he might be the answer to prayers Jake couldn't begin to imagine. The lead Zephyrian's claws extended with an audible snick. "You're making a mistake, human. This creature is valuable property, legally purchased and documented. Interfere with our transaction and you'll find yourself answering to station security." "Then call them," Jake said simply. "Let's see what they think about three grown Zephyrians terrorizing someone half their size in a public area." It was a bluff, and they all knew it. Nexus Station's security forces were notoriously corrupt and generally looked the other way when it came to the treatment of exotic specimens. But Jake was counting on the Zephyrians not wanting to attract official attention to whatever they were really planning to do with the creature. For a long moment, the standoff held. Jake could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could smell the ozone tang of the station's recycled air, could feel the weight of the plasma cutter in his hand. The albino creature had gone completely still, as if afraid that any movement might shatter whatever fragile protection Jake's presence provided. Then the lead Zephyrian made his choice. Instead of backing down, he lunged forward, claws extended and aimed at Jake's throat. Jake had exactly two advantages in the fight that followed. He was faster than the Zephyrian expected, and he fought dirty. The plasma cutter came up and around in a wide arc, its superheated beam slicing through the air where the alien's head had been a split second before. The Zephyrian twisted away from the attack, but Jake was already moving, using his lower center of gravity to drive his shoulder into the alien's midsection. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and violence. The Zephyrian's claws raked across Jake's back, shredding his work shirt and leaving burning lines of pain across his skin. But Jake had grown up in Detroit, where you learned to fight before you learned to walk, and he'd spent 3 years on Nexus Station dealing with every kind of alien thug and con artist in the galaxy. His elbow found the Zephyrian's solar plexus, driving the air from the alien's lungs in a satisfying whoosh. The plasma cutter had been knocked from his hand in the fall, but Jake's tool belt was full of other options. His hand closed around a molecular wrench, its grip familiar and comforting, and he brought it around in a vicious uppercut that caught the Zephyrian under the chin. The alien's head snapped back with a crack that echoed through the repair bay, and he went limp. Jake rolled away from the unconscious Zephyrian, expecting to face the other two, but they had apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. The repair bay was now full of spectators, drawn by the sound of the fight, and the two remaining Zephyrians were already melting back into the crowd. Jake climbed to his feet, wincing as his torn shirt pulled against the claw marks on his back. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by the sharp ache of his injuries and a growing awareness of what he'd just done. He'd picked a fight with 3 alien slavers over a creature he didn't even know in front of half the station's criminal population. His mother would have been proud. His common sense was filing a formal complaint. The albino creature was still huddled against the crates, but its violet eyes were fixed on Jake with an expression of wonder and disbelief. Up close, Jake could see that the being was young, probably equivalent to a human teenager, and that its injuries were worse than he'd initially thought. There were burn marks on its white fur that looked like shock prod wounds, and its left foreleg was bent at an unnatural angle. "Hey there," Jake said softly, crouching down to bring himself closer to the creature's eye level. "You okay, kid?" The creature tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. Jake looked around the crowd of onlookers, most of whom were already dispersing now that the excitement was over, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come on," he said, gently reaching out his hand. "Let's get you out of here." The creature looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, and Jake could see the fear warring with hope in those remarkable violet eyes. Finally, slowly, it extended one paw and placed it in Jake's palm. The moment their skin made contact, Jake felt something he'd never experienced before. It was like a jolt of electricity, but warm and welcoming rather than painful. Images flashed through his mind. A green world under twin suns, creatures like this one running free across vast plains, the sound of laughter that wasn't quite human but was definitely joyful. The creature's eyes widened, and Jake knew it had felt the connection too. "My name is Zara," the creature whispered, and now Jake could hear the musical quality in its voice that he'd missed before. "I am of the Lyrian people." "Jake," he replied, helping Zara to its feet with infinite care. "I'm human from Earth, and I think we need to have a long talk." As they made their way across the repair bay toward Jake's small workshop, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the docking bay entrance. The observer was tall and thin, wrapped in the kind of environmental suit that obscured both species and gender. But its attention was focused entirely on the unlikely pair with an intensity that would have worried Jake considerably if he'd been aware of it. The figure spoke quietly into a communication device, its words lost in the ambient noise of the station. "Yes, I've found it, the last of the Lyrian bloodline, and it appears to have found a human protector." A pause. "No, I don't think that will be a problem. In fact, it might be exactly what we need." Jake helped Zara settle onto a makeshift bed in the corner of his workshop, fashioned from clean drop cloths and spare padding from equipment crates. The young Lyrian was clearly exhausted, its violet eyes fluttering closed almost as soon as its head touched the improvised pillow. "Rest," Jake said softly. "We'll figure everything else out later." As he cleaned and bandaged his own wounds, Jake found himself staring at his unexpected guest. He'd acted on instinct back there, the same instinct that had gotten him in trouble countless times throughout his life. But looking at Zara now, seeing the rise and fall of the creature's chest as it slept peacefully for probably the first time in weeks, Jake knew he'd done the right thing. He just had no idea how much trouble the right thing was about to cause. Outside his workshop, Nexus Station continued its eternal cycle of commerce and corruption. But Jake Morrison had just taken the first step down a path that would lead him to places he'd never imagined and force him to become something he'd never thought he could be. The last thing he saw before exhaustion claimed him was Zara's peaceful face, and the faint smile that curved the young Lyrian's muzzle as it dreamed of green fields and freedom. Jake woke to the sound of whimpering and the acrid smell of burned metal. His back ached where the Zephyrian's claws had raked across it, but the medkit's healing gel had done its job during the night. The wounds were sealed and would leave only faint scars, another set to add to his collection from 3 years of frontier living. But the whimpering worried him. He rolled off his cot and looked toward the corner where he'd left Zara sleeping, and his heart clenched at what he saw. The young Lyrian was curled into a tight ball, its white fur damp with sweat and its entire body trembling. Its violet eyes were squeezed shut, but tears leaked from beneath the closed lids. It was having a nightmare, and from the broken words escaping its muzzle, Jake could guess what kind. "No, please," Zara whispered, its voice thick with terror. I'll be good. I won't ask for food. Please don't use the prod again. Jake approached slowly, his bare feet silent on the workshop's metal floor. He'd seen enough trauma cases during his youth in Detroit to know that waking someone from a nightmare too suddenly could cause more harm than good. Instead, he began speaking in a low, steady voice. Hey Zara, you're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you here. You're in my workshop on Nexus Station, remember? Jake's workshop, you're safe. The Lyrian's trembling began to subside, and its breathing evened out. After a few more moments, those remarkable violet eyes opened, immediately searching the dim light until they found Jake's face. Jake, Zara's voice was small and uncertain. You're real, this isn't another dream. I'm real, Jake confirmed, settling cross-legged on the floor nearby but not too close. How are you feeling? Any better? Zara tried to sit up and immediately winced, its left foreleg still bent at that unnatural angle. Jake could see that the limb was badly swollen, and he suspected it was broken. That was going to be a problem. Nexus Station's medical facilities were expensive and not particularly friendly to beings who couldn't prove their citizenship status. Everything hurts, Zara admitted, then seemed to catch itself. But I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express. You saved my life last night. Don't mention it, Jake said, meaning it literally. The fewer people who knew about his impromptu rescue mission, the better. But we need to get that arm looked at. It's definitely broken. Zara's ears drooped. I have no money, no identification, no legal status on this station. The medical facilities won't treat me. Jake had figured as much. It was the eternal problem of the Outer Rim territories. Plenty of opportunities for those who could afford them, and a grinding, merciless system for those who couldn't. But Jake hadn't spent 3 years on Nexus Station without learning a few tricks. Leave that to me, he said. I know someone who might be able to help, but first I think you need to tell me your story. How did you end up with those Zephyrian bastards? Zara's expression grew distant, and for a moment Jake thought the young Lyrian might refuse to answer. When it finally spoke, its voice was barely above a whisper. My people come from a world called Lyros in the Andromeda Reach. We're not like most species in the galaxy. We don't build cities or starships or weapons. We live simply in harmony with our world and each other. We have abilities that others find valuable. What kind of abilities? Zara hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. We can share thoughts and emotions through touch, not read minds exactly, but communicate in ways that transcend language, form bonds that are deeper than words. Some of us can even sense intentions, know when someone means harm or kindness. Jake thought about the jolt he'd felt when Zara first touched his hand, the brief flash of images and emotions that hadn't been his own. Is that what happened last night, when you touched my hand? Yes, I could feel your intentions, your desire to help without expecting anything in return. It's been so long since I felt genuine kindness from another being that I almost didn't recognize it. Zara's eyes filled with tears again. My people are peaceful, Jake. We have no weapons, no defenses beyond our ability to sense danger and flee. We thought that would be enough. What happened? The Dominion happened. Zara's voice turned bitter. An empire of conquerors who decided that a species with empathic abilities would make perfect slaves. They could use us to read the intentions of their enemies, to detect lies, to serve as living emotional dampeners for their warriors. They came to Lyros 3 cycles ago with ships and weapons we couldn't hope to match. Jake felt a cold anger building in his chest. He'd heard of the Dominion, a collection of aggressive species that had been expanding through the outer sectors for the past decade. They were known for their brutality and their willingness to enslave entire populations for economic gain. Most of my people were killed in the initial assault, Zara continued. Those who survived were taken as slaves and scattered across Dominion space. I was just a pup then, barely old enough to understand what was happening. I've spent the last 3 years being sold from one master to another, used as a curiosity or a tool. And the albino thing. A genetic quirk that makes me even more valuable to collectors. Most Lyrians have golden fur and blue eyes. My coloring is incredibly rare. The Zephyrians bought me from a Dominion flesh trader 2 weeks ago, intending to sell me to someone called the Collector on Terminus Prime. Jake's blood ran cold. He'd heard whispers of the Collector, a mysterious figure who supposedly maintained a private zoo of the galaxy's rarest sentient species. The stories said that beings who ended up in the Collector's possession were never seen again. Well, that's not happening, Jake said firmly. Not while I'm breathing. Zara stared at him in amazement. You would do that? Risk yourself for someone you barely know? Your species must be incredibly noble. Jake let out a bitter laugh. Noble? Kid, you've got humans confused with someone else. Most of my species would probably sell you to the highest bidder without losing a minute's sleep. I'm not special. I'm just too stubborn to know when to mind my own business. Before Zara could respond, the workshop's comm unit chimed with an incoming message. Jake frowned and activated the display, expecting to see Captain Vexter complaining about his ship repairs. Instead, he found himself looking at the face of Dr. Alina Vasquez, one of the few people on Nexus Station he genuinely trusted. Alina was a former Earth military medic who'd lost her license to practice on human colonies after she'd been caught treating refugees without proper documentation. She now ran a small clinic in Nexus Station's lower levels, serving the station's forgotten and unwanted with skill and discretion. She was also one of the few humans on the station who shared Jake's inability to ignore suffering. Jake, I need to see you immediately. Alina's recorded voice was tense with urgency. And bring your new friend. Word's already spreading about what happened last night, and you've got problems headed your way. The message cut off, leaving Jake staring at the blank screen with a growing sense of dread. Problems? Zara asked quietly. Yeah, Jake muttered, grabbing his jacket and tool belt. Seems like we've attracted some attention. Can you walk? Zara struggled to its feet, favoring the injured foreleg but managing to stay upright. I can manage. Good, because we need to move. Alina's clinic is in the lower levels, and if she says we have problems, then we definitely have problems. The journey through Nexus Station's corridors was a lesson in paranoia. Jake had never paid much attention to the surveillance cameras and security sensors that dotted the station's public areas, but now he felt them tracking his every movement. Twice he had to take detours when he spotted beings who looked like they might be following them, and by the time they reached Alina's clinic, his nerves were stretched tight as a thruster cable. Alina's clinic was tucked away in a forgotten corner of the station's lower residential section, behind a faded sign that simply read, Medical Services Available. The waiting room was empty except for an elderly Cathurian who was having his breathing apparatus adjusted. But Alina took one look at Jake and Zara and immediately ushered them into her examination room. Dr. Alina Vasquez was a small woman with graying hair and intense brown eyes that had seen too much suffering to be anything but kind. She took one look at Zara's injuries and immediately began pulling medical supplies from her cabinets. Broken radius and ulna in the left arm, she diagnosed after a brief examination. Multiple contusions, evidence of electrical burns, and significant malnutrition. How long since you've had a proper meal, honey? I'm not sure, Zara admitted. Time becomes difficult to track when you're being transported in cargo holds. Alina's jaw tightened, but her hands remained gentle as she began treating Zara's injuries. Jake, we need to talk privately. Jake followed her to a small office adjoining the examination room, leaving Zara to rest on the medical bed. Alina closed the door behind them and turned to face him with an expression of deep concern. Do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into? She asked without preamble. I helped someone who needed help. Since when is that a crime? Since that someone is worth approximately 50 million credits to the right buyer, Alina replied grimly. Jake, I've been treating refugees and outcasts in this sector for 5 years. I've learned to recognize the valuable ones because they're the ones who disappear in the middle of the night. That young Lyrian in there isn't just rare because of its albino coloring. It's rare because it might be the last of its species. Jake felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. Last. I did some checking after I got word about last night's excitement. The Dominion's conquest of Lyros was 3 years ago, just like your friend said, but it was more thorough than most people realize. They didn't just enslave the population, Jake. They systematically hunted down and eliminated every Lyrian they couldn't control. The species is functionally extinct. But Zara said there were other survivors. Were, past tense. According to the intelligence I could dig up, the last confirmed Lyrian died in Dominion custody 6 months ago. If your friend is telling the truth about its age and background, then it might literally be the last living member of its species. Jake sank into a chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting him. He'd thought he was just helping a kid in trouble. Instead, He'd inadvertently stolen one of the rarest beings in the galaxy from some very dangerous people. "There's more," Alina continued. "The Zephyrians you tangled with last night, they're not independent traders. They work for someone called Mordek the Cruel, who controls most of the slave trade in this sector. And word is that Mordek has already put a bounty on both your heads. 20,000 credits for you, 50,000 for the Lyrian, dead or alive." 50,000, Jake whistled despite himself. "That's serious money. Serious enough that half the bounty hunters on this station are probably gearing up to come after you right now. Jake, you need to get that kid off Nexus Station tonight, and you need to get as far away as possible." "And go where? We can't exactly book passage on a passenger liner. Zara doesn't have any documentation, and I'm about to be a wanted man." Alina was quiet for a moment, then opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a data pad. "There might be one option. It's dangerous, and it'll mean leaving everything you've built here behind, but it might be your only chance." She activated the pad and showed Jake a star chart displaying a region of space he didn't recognize. "The Terran Colonial Administration has been looking for skilled mechanics to help establish new settlements in the frontier territories. It's rough work, dangerous conditions, and the pay is terrible. But they don't ask too many questions about your past, and they have a policy of accepting refugees under humanitarian provisions." "The frontier territories are months away from here," Jake pointed out. "How are we supposed to get there without being caught?" "I have a contact who might be able to help. Captain Sarah Chen of the cargo hauler, Lucky Strike. She's an old friend from my military days, and she's got reasons of her own to avoid Imperial entanglements. She's scheduled to depart for the frontier territories tomorrow night with a load of mining equipment." Jake studied the star chart, his mind racing through possibilities and problems. It would mean abandoning his workshop, his tools, everything he'd worked to build over the past 3 years. But the alternative was watching Zara disappear into the hands of slavers or worse, and that wasn't really an alternative at all. What would this Captain Chen want in return? Sarah's ship has been having drive problems for months. She can't afford a proper overhaul, and the patch jobs she's been getting aren't holding. You fix her ship, she gets you safely to the frontier territories. No questions asked. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than anything Jake could come up with on his own. And the clock was ticking. Every moment they stayed on Nexus Station increased the chances that Mordak's people would find them. "All right," Jake decided, "set up the meeting." Alina nodded and began entering commands on her comm unit. "I'll contact Sarah and arrange something for tonight. But Jake, there's one more thing you need to know." "What?" "That connection you felt when you first touched the Lyrian? It's not going away. According to what I could research about their species, Lyrians form empathic bonds with other beings that last for life. In their culture, those bonds were considered sacred, more binding than marriage or blood relations." Jake thought about the warmth he'd felt when Zara touched his hand, the brief glimpse into the young Lyrian's mind and memories. "Are you saying we're bonded?" "I'm saying that Lyrian psychology is built around these connections. Without them, they become depressed, listless, eventually dying of what can only be described as loneliness. If Zara has bonded with you, then separating the two of you could be a death sentence." "Then we don't separate," Jake said simply. "Problem solved." Alina smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. "You know, for a grease monkey with no sense of self-preservation, you're not a bad human being, Jake Morrison." "Yeah, well, don't spread it around. I have a reputation to maintain." They returned to the examination room to find Zara sitting up on the medical bed, its left arm now properly set and secured in a biocast that would accelerate the healing process. The young Lyrian looked up as they entered, and Jake could see that some of the fear had faded from those violet eyes. "Dr. Vasquez says I'll heal completely," Zara reported with something approaching hope in its voice. "She also gave me something called chocolate. I've never tasted anything so wonderful." Jake couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, chocolate's pretty great. Just wait until you try pizza." "Jake," Alina interrupted gently, "you need to explain the situation to Zara. The dangers, the options, everything. It needs to understand what it's choosing." Jake nodded and pulled up a chair next to the medical bed. Over the next hour, he explained everything. The bounty on their heads, the plan to escape to the frontier territories, the risks involved, and the likelihood that they might never be able to return to civilized space. Zara listened to it all in silence, its violet eyes never leaving Jake's face. When he finished, the young Lyrian was quiet for a long moment. "You're offering me freedom," Zara finally said. "Real freedom, not just another cage with better bars." "I'm offering you a chance," Jake corrected. "No guarantees. We might get caught, we might not make it off the station, and even if we do, life in the frontier territories isn't going to be easy. But we'd be together." The simple question hit Jake like a plasma bolt to the chest. In all his planning and worrying, he'd never really considered what this meant for him personally. He was about to give up everything he'd worked for to help someone he'd known for less than 24 hours. By any rational measure, it was insane. But looking at Zara's hopeful expression, feeling the warmth of their empathic connection like a steady flame in his chest, Jake realized that rationality had nothing to do with it. Somehow, impossibly, this scared young being had become important to him in a way that defied explanation. "Yeah," he said softly, "we'd be together." Zara's face lit up with the first genuine smile Jake had seen from the young Lyrian. "Then I choose freedom. Whatever the risks, whatever the cost, I choose to go with you." Elena cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Well, that's settled then. Now we just have to figure out how to keep you both alive long enough to make it happen." As if summoned by her words, the clinic's proximity alarms began to chime, indicating that someone had entered the outer waiting area. Elena's expression immediately became tense. "I'm not expecting any patients," she whispered, moving to check the security monitor. Her face went pale as she saw what was displayed there. "We have a problem," she said urgently. "There are 3 beings in environmental suits in my waiting room, and they're not here for medical treatment. The way they're standing, the way they're scanning the room, they're definitely hunters." Jake cursed under his breath. They'd found them faster than he'd expected. "Is there another way out?" "Emergency exit through the back. It leads to the maintenance tunnels, but Jake, those tunnels are a maze. Without a guide, you could wander for days." "Better than being caught here. Zara, can you walk?" The young Lyrian slipped off the medical bed, testing its weight on the healing arm. "I can manage." Elena grabbed a medical bag and stuffed it with supplies. "Take this. Painkillers, antibiotics, emergency rations, and Jake, take this too." She pressed a small device into his hand that looked like a modified comm unit. "It's a one-time use emergency beacon. If things go really bad, activate it and Sarah Chen will know to come looking for you. But only use it as a last resort. Once you activate it, everyone in the sector will know where you are." The sounds from the waiting room were getting louder. Whoever was out there was becoming impatient. "Go," Elena urged. "I'll try to stall them, but you need to move now." Jake grabbed Zara's good hand and led the young Lyrian toward the emergency exit. As they slipped through the door into the dim maintenance tunnel beyond, he heard Elena greeting their visitors with professional courtesy and carefully controlled fear. The tunnels were everything Elena had warned and worse. They stretched in all directions through the station's infrastructure, a labyrinth of pipes, cables, and access ways that had grown organically over decades of expansion and modification. The lighting was sporadic at best, and the air was thick with the smell of recycled atmosphere and machine oil. But they were free, at least for the moment. And as Jake led Zara deeper into the maze of tunnels, guided by nothing more than intuition and a desperate hope that they were moving in the right direction, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of their troubles. Behind them, getting fainter with each turn, he could hear the sounds of Elena's clinic being systematically searched. He just hoped she would be safe, and that her sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. "Jake," Zara whispered as they paused at a junction of 4 different tunnels. "I can sense something. There are others down here with us. They're not friendly." Jake's hand instinctively moved to his plasma cutter. "How many?" "I'm not sure. The emotions are confused, hungry, desperate. I think they're scavengers or worse." "Great." Jake looked down the 4 possible paths, trying to decide which one might lead them closer to the docking levels where Captain Chen's ship would be waiting. "Any idea which way we should go?" Zara closed its violet eyes and extended its senses, feeling for the emotional resonances of the beings around them. After a moment, it pointed down the leftmost tunnel. "That way, there are fewer hostile presences and I can sense something. Familiar. I'm not sure what, but it feels safer." Jake nodded and led them down the indicated path. As they moved through the dimly lit tunnel, He found himself wondering how many other impossible situations he was going to have to navigate before this was over. But looking at Zara's determined expression, seeing the trust in those remarkable violet eyes, Jake realized that he'd already made his choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The maintenance tunnels beneath Nexus Station were a world unto themselves, a forgotten realm of shadows and mechanical whispers where the station's unwanted inhabitants made their homes. Jake and Zara had been navigating the maze for 3 hours, following Zara's empathic senses through passages that seemed to twist back on themselves with malicious intent. "This way," Zara whispered, pointing toward a tunnel that looked identical to the dozen others they'd passed. The young Lyrian's ability to sense the emotions of nearby beings had proven invaluable, steering them away from hostile scavenger gangs and toward areas where they might find temporary sanctuary. Jake was beginning to understand why the Dominion had found Lyrians so valuable as slaves. Zara's empathic abilities were like having a living radar system, capable of detecting threats and opportunities that would be invisible to other species. It was a gift that could have made its possessor incredibly wealthy in the right circumstances, or incredibly dead in the wrong ones. They rounded a corner and found themselves in a larger chamber where several tunnels converged. Ancient atmospheric processors hummed in the walls, and the air was thick with the smell of recycled oxygen and industrial lubricants. But it was what occupied the center of the chamber that made Jake stop in his tracks. A small camp had been established around one of the massive support pillars that ran from floor to ceiling. Salvaged furniture, jury-rigged lighting systems, and improvised shelters created a pocket of civilization in the mechanical wilderness. And moving between the shelters were at least a dozen beings of various species, all of them bearing the unmistakable marks of the dispossessed. "Refugees," Jake realized. "This is a refugee camp." Zara nodded, its violet eyes wide with something approaching wonder. "I can feel them. They're afraid, hungry, desperate, but also hopeful. They've found safety here, at least temporarily." One of the camp's inhabitants noticed them standing at the tunnel entrance. She was a Tellurian, her blue-scaled skin marked with the ritual scarification that indicated she'd once held a position of authority in her species' merchant hierarchy. Now she wore the patched clothing and wary expression of someone who'd lost everything and was trying to rebuild from nothing. "You're new," the Tellurian observed, her hand resting casually near what looked like a makeshift weapon. "Refugees." Jake nodded. "Something like that. We're looking for passage off the station. Heard there might be someone here who could help." The Tellurian studied them for a long moment, her gaze lingering on Zara's distinctive albino features. "Lyrian," she said softly, and Jake tensed, ready to fight or flee. But instead of hostility, he heard recognition and sympathy in her voice. "I thought they were all gone." "So did most people," Jake replied carefully. "My name is Kala Vinter," the Tellurian said, stepping closer. "I once traded with Lyros before the Dominion came. Your people were kind to me when others wouldn't even acknowledge my existence. If I can help you, I will." She led them deeper into the camp, past shelters inhabited by beings from across the galaxy. Jake saw Corellians who'd fled political persecution, Andorian miners whose worlds had been strip-mined into uninhabitability, and humans who'd run afoul of various colonial administrations. They were the galaxy's forgotten, the beings who'd fallen through the cracks of civilization and landed in places like Nexus Station's underground. "Most of the people here are waiting for transport to somewhere safer," Kala explained as they walked. "The frontier territories, the independent colonies, anywhere that doesn't ask too many questions. But passage is expensive, and most of us have nothing left to trade." "How do you survive down here?" Zara asked. "We help each other, share what we have, pool our skills and resources. Some of us still have contacts in the upper levels who provide food and supplies in exchange for work. It's not much, but it's better than what most of us left behind." They reached the center of the camp, where a large cooking fire had been built in a salvaged metal container. Around the fire sat a group of children from various species, listening as an elderly human told them stories of distant worlds and brave heroes. The sight made Jake's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "We try to maintain hope," Kala said, noticing his expression. "Especially for the young ones, they need to believe that there's something better waiting for them." Zara knelt down beside the group of children, and immediately several of them gravitated toward the young Lyrian. Jake watched in amazement as Zara began to glow with a soft, barely perceptible light. The children's faces lit up with wonder and delight, their previous wariness forgotten. Empathic resonance, Kala explained quietly. Lyrians can share emotions directly. Your friend is giving those children something they haven't felt in months, pure, uncomplicated joy. Jake felt his throat tighten as he watched Zara interact with the refugee children. The young Lyrian was sharing something precious from its own depleted reserves of hope and happiness, giving these forgotten kids a moment of wonder in their dark world. "We need to talk," he said to Kala, privately. They moved to a quieter corner of the camp, where Kala listened with growing concern as Jake explained their situation. The bounty, the hunters, their desperate need to get off the station before Mordak's people caught up with them. 50,000 credits, Kala mused when he finished. "That's enough money to get half the people in this camp to safety. You're carrying a dangerous burden, Jake Morrison." "I know, that's why we need to leave, tonight if possible." Kala was quiet for a moment, watching Zara with the children. The young Lyrian had begun to tell them stories of its homeworld, painting pictures of vast grasslands and crystal cities with words and shared emotions that made the children's eyes shine with vicarious memory. "There might be a way," she said finally, "but it's dangerous and it'll require help from people who aren't exactly law-abiding citizens." "I'm listening." "There's a smuggler named Rikvar Thas who operates out of the lower docking bays. He specializes in moving cargo that doesn't officially exist, if you understand my meaning. Word is he's planning a run to the outer colonies tonight, and he might be willing to take on passengers for the right price." "What kind of price?" "Not money. Rikvar's ship, the Shadow Runner, has been having problems with its cloaking array. He needs someone who can perform delicate repairs under time pressure, someone with human ingenuity and mechanical skills." Jake considered this. Working on a cloaking array would be tricky under the best circumstances, and doing it while hiding from bounty hunters would add several layers of complexity. But it beat trying to make their way through the station's public areas where any of Mordak's people might spot them. "Can you set up a meeting?" "Already have," Kala replied with a slight smile. "I sent word as soon as you mentioned your profession. Rikvar will meet you in Docking Bay 7 in 2 hours. But Jake, you need to understand what you're getting into. Rikvar is reliable and surprisingly honorable for a smuggler, but he works with some very dangerous people. Once you're aboard his ship, you'll be committed to whatever cargo run he's planning, as opposed to staying here and getting caught by bounty hunters." "Good point." Jake looked around the refugee camp, taking in the faces of beings who'd lost everything, but were still trying to build something better from the wreckage of their lives. It reminded him of the community workshops back in Detroit, where his father had taught him that sometimes the most important repairs were the ones that held families and neighborhoods together. "Kala," he said impulsively, "if we make it off this station, if we find some way to make a new life out there, I want to help. These people deserve better than hiding in maintenance tunnels." The Tellurian's expression softened. "You have a good heart, Jake Morrison. I hope the galaxy doesn't break it." They returned to the group around the fire, where Zara was finishing a story about the great migration of the Lyrian clans across their homeworld's southern continent. The children were completely enthralled, their young faces reflecting the wonder and joy that Zara was sharing with them. "We need to go," Jake said quietly when the story ended. "We have a meeting to keep." Zara nodded and began to stand, but several of the children grabbed onto the young Lyrian's arms, reluctant to let their newfound friend leave. "Will we see you again?" asked a small Endorian girl, her large eyes bright with hope. Zara knelt down to the child's level, placing a gentle paw on her cheek. For a moment, both beings glowed with that soft, empathic light. "I don't know," Zara said honestly, "but I want you to remember something. No matter how dark things seem, no matter how lost you feel, there are always people who care about you. Sometimes they're strangers who become friends, sometimes they're friends who become family. Hold on to that hope and never let anyone take it from you." The child nodded solemnly, and Jake felt something twist in his chest. Zara was giving these children the kind of emotional gift that his species could never provide, sharing hope and comfort on a level that transcended species barriers. As they prepared to leave the camp, Kala pressed a small package into Jake's hands. "Food and water for the journey," she explained. "And this." She handed him a small communication device. It's linked to our network down here. If you ever need help, if you ever find a way to return the kindness you've shown today, use it. Jake pocketed the device, touched by the gesture. Thank you for everything. Thank the Lyrian, Kala replied. In 10 minutes it gave those children more hope than they've had in months. That's a rare gift. The journey to Docking Bay 7 took them through parts of the station Jake had never seen before. The lower levels were a maze of cargo holds, storage areas, and service tunnels that stretched for kilometers in every direction. The lighting was dim and unreliable, and the air tasted of ozone and industrial chemicals. I can sense someone following us, Zara whispered as they navigated a particularly dark section of corridor. They're staying back, but they've been tracking us for the last few minutes. Jake cursed under his breath. Bounty hunters. I don't think so. The emotional signature is different, curious rather than hostile, almost familiar somehow. They rounded a corner and found themselves in a broad corridor that led directly to the docking bay areas. And there, standing in the middle of the passage with arms crossed and a patient expression, was the figure that had been following them. It was a woman in her early 50s, wearing the kind of practical shipsuit that marked her as either a freighter captain or a very well-dressed smuggler. Her graying hair was pulled back in a functional ponytail, and her brown eyes held the kind of steady competence that came from decades of dealing with dangerous situations. Jake Morrison, she said as they approached. I'm Captain Sarah Chen. Dr. Vasquez said you might be looking for passage to the frontier territories. Jake stopped, suddenly wary. This was too convenient, too easy. How did you know where to find us? Sarah smiled, and there was something familiar about the expression that Jake couldn't quite place. I've been watching the station's security feeds. When a human mechanic and an albino Lyrian start moving through the lower levels, it's not exactly hard to track, especially when half the station's bounty hunters are looking for the same pair. And you just happen to be in the neighborhood. I happen to be doing Alina a favor. She saved my life more times than I can count, so when she calls and asks me to help a friend in trouble, I don't ask too many questions. Sarah's expression grew more serious. But I do need to know what I'm getting into. Alina mentioned something about drive problems that need fixing. Jake nodded. I'm a mechanic, good with engines, power systems, anything that needs careful hands and a stubborn attitude. In exchange, you get us safely to the frontier territories. And you're willing to work on a ship that might be involved in activities that aren't strictly legal. Lady, at this point, I'm willing to work on a ship that's held together with duct tape and optimism if it gets us off this station. Sarah laughed and the sound transformed her entire face. Good answer. Come on, let me show you the lucky strike. Fair warning, though, she's not much to look at, but she's fast and she's never let me down when it mattered. Docking Bay 7 was one of the smaller berths in the station's cargo section, reserved for ships that valued discretion over convenience. The lucky strike was indeed not much to look at. A modified Corellian freighter that had seen better decades, with hull plating that bore the scars of countless near misses, and an engine configuration that looked like it had been assembled by someone with more enthusiasm than formal training. But Jake's experienced eye could see past the cosmetic damage to the ship's underlying bones. The lucky strike was solid, well-maintained despite her appearance, and equipped with several modifications that weren't standard on civilian vessels. She's beautiful, he said, and meant it. Sarah beamed with pride. Bought her 15 years ago with my military pension and a lot of optimism. She's been my home ever since. Her expression sobered. But Alina was right about the drive problems. I've been nursing the hyperdrive motivator for months, and the last patch job I had done is starting to fail. If it goes completely, we'll be stuck in normal space until I can afford a proper overhaul. Jake walked around the ship, taking in the details of her construction and modification. How long do I have to work on it? We need to leave in 6 hours, before the next shift change gives Mordak's people a chance to expand their search. Think you can manage it? Give me access to your engineering sections and a decent toolkit, and I'll have your hyperdrive purring like a contented cat. Deal. Sarah extended her hand and Jake shook it, sealing their arrangement. Welcome aboard the Lucky Strike, Jake Morrison. Try not to get us all killed. As they boarded the ship, Jake caught Zara looking back toward the station's interior with a wistful expression. Having second thoughts? He asked quietly. No, Zara replied. Just thinking about those children back at the camp. I hope they find their way to safety. They will, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. People like Kala don't give up easily. They'll find a way. The Lucky Strike's engineering section was a masterpiece of improvised technology. Sarah had clearly been modifying and upgrading her ship for years, adding systems and capabilities that turned the aging freighter into something approaching a warship. Jake whistled appreciatively as he examined the hyperdrive assembly. "Whoever did your last repair job was either a genius or completely insane," he announced after his initial assessment. "They managed to keep your motivator running by jury-rigging the power coupling through your shield generator. It's actually brilliant, but it's also completely unstable. Can you fix it properly?" Jake was already pulling tools from Sarah's engineering kit, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been repairing impossible machines since childhood. "Better than properly. When I'm done with this beauty, she'll be running smoother than the day she left the factory." As he worked, Jake found himself falling into the meditative rhythm that had always accompanied his best repairs. There was something deeply satisfying about taking a broken system and making it whole again, about finding the elegant solution hidden within mechanical complexity. Zara settled nearby, watching him work with fascination. "Is this what you did before you came to Nexus Station?" "More or less," Jake replied, carefully adjusting a power coupling. "Though back on Earth, I mostly worked on industrial equipment. Atmospheric processors, mining machinery, that kind of thing. Ships are more challenging, but the principles are the same." "You're very good at this." Jake paused in his work to look at Zara. "How can you tell?" "I can feel your emotions while you work. There's a sense of rightness, like you're doing exactly what you were meant to do. It's beautiful." The comment made Jake unexpectedly self-conscious. He'd never thought of his work as beautiful before, just necessary. But seeing his skills through Zara's empathic perception gave him a new appreciation for the craft his father had taught him. "Tell me about your homeworld," he said, returning to his repairs. "What was it like before the Dominion came?" Zara's expression grew distant, and for a moment Jake could feel echoes of the young Lyrian's memories through their empathic connection. Rolling grasslands under twin suns, crystal cities that sang with harmonic resonance, communities bound together by emotional bonds that transcended individual identity. "Lyros was a world of harmony," Zara said softly. "Not perfect, but peaceful. We lived in small communities scattered across the continents, connected by the great empathic network that linked all our people. Conflict was rare because we could feel each other's pain too deeply to cause unnecessary suffering." "Sounds like paradise." "In many ways it was, but it also made us vulnerable. When the Dominion came with their ships and weapons, we had no concept of the kind of focused hatred and greed that drove them. We tried to communicate, to share our peaceful intentions through empathic contact. They used our openness against us." Jake's hands tightened on his tools as he felt a flash of Zara's memory. Dominion soldiers firing into crowds of Lyrians who were trying to surrender, their laughter echoing as they hunted down the survivors. It was a level of cruelty that made his stomach turn. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Your people deserved better." "All people deserve better than what the Dominion offers," Zara replied. "But my people are gone. I'm the last, and when I die, everything we were dies with me." "Hey," Jake stopped working and turned to face Zara directly. "You're not the last of anything. You're the first. The first Lyrian to have a chance at real freedom, the first to choose your own path instead of having it chosen for you. What you do with that freedom, that's going to be your choice." Zara's violet eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of hope rather than sorrow. "I've never thought of it that way." "Start thinking of it that way. Because from where I sit, the galaxy just got a lot more interesting now that there's a free Lyrian in it." Jake returned to his work with renewed focus, driven by a determination he couldn't quite explain. Fixing Sarah's hyperdrive had become more than just earning their passage off the station. It had become the first step toward building something better, toward giving Zara the kind of future its people had been denied. 3 hours later, he emerged from the engineering section covered in grease but grinning with satisfaction. "Fire her up," he called to Sarah over the ship's intercom. "Let's see what she can do." The hyperdrive came online with a smooth hum that spoke of perfectly balanced systems and optimal power flow. Sarah's voice crackled over the comm system, filled with amazement and delight. "Jake, I don't know what you did down there, but my boards are showing efficiency ratings I've never seen before. How did you manage it? Trade secret, Jake replied, wiping his hands clean. Let's just say your ship appreciates being treated with respect instead of being held together with spare parts and prayer. Captain Chen's laughter echoed through the ship's corridors. Well, whatever you did, consider our deal more than satisfied. We're ready for departure whenever you are. As if summoned by her words, the ship's proximity alarms began to chime, indicating that someone was approaching the docking bay. Sarah's voice returned to the intercom, but now it was tense with urgency. Jake, we've got company. 3 ships just entered the docking bay, and they're not here to wish us a pleasant journey. How fast can you and Zara get to the bridge? Jake grabbed Zara's hand and ran for the ship's central corridor. Through the viewports, he could see armed figures in combat armor deploying from the newly arrived ships. They moved with the disciplined precision of professional soldiers rather than the chaotic aggression of common bounty hunters. Dominion troops, Zara whispered, its face pale with terror. They've found me. Not if I have anything to say about it, Jake growled, pushing them both toward the bridge as fast as they could move. The hunt had escalated far beyond simple bounty hunters and local criminals. Now they were facing the full power of the Dominion Empire, and Jake was beginning to understand that Zara represented more than just a rare specimen to be sold to collectors. The young Lyrian might be the key to something much larger and more dangerous than either of them had imagined. The bridge of the Lucky Strike was cramped but efficient, dominated by a pilot's console that had been modified with so many additional systems that it looked more like the command center of a small warship than a civilian freighter. Captain Sarah Chen was already strapped into the pilot's seat, her hands dancing across the controls as she initiated the ship's departure sequence. 30 seconds until we can launch, she announced without taking her eyes off her displays. But those Dominion troops are moving fast. They'll be at our airlock in less than a minute. Jake could see the armored figures through the bridge viewports, advancing across the docking bay with weapons raised and ready. Their equipment was military-grade, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't bounty hunters looking for easy money. They were soldiers on a mission. Why would the Dominion send troops after one escaped slave? He asked, strapping himself and Zara into the bridge's passenger seats. It doesn't make economic sense. Zara's violet eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else in them now. A growing understanding that made Jake's stomach tighten with apprehension. Because I'm not just any escaped slave, Zara said quietly. I'm the last Lyrian, which means I'm the only being in the galaxy who can access the Great Archive. What's the Great Archive? The collective memory of my people. Every emotion, every experience, every piece of knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of Lyrian civilization. It's stored in a quantum crystalline matrix hidden somewhere in the ruins of our homeworld. Sarah cursed vividly as the first of the Dominion troops reached the ship's outer hull. Whatever this archive thing is, they really want it. I'm reading scanner signatures that suggest these guys are equipped with military-grade boarding equipment. Jake's mind was racing, trying to process the implications. You're saying there's some kind of database on your homeworld that only you can access. Not just a database, Zara replied. The Great Archive contains the technological and scientific knowledge of an entire civilization, medical techniques, engineering principles, energy manipulation methods that your species hasn't even discovered yet. In the right hands, it could revolutionize galactic civilization. And in the wrong hands, it could give the Dominion the technological advantage they need to conquer the entire galaxy. The ship shuddered as the Dominion troops attached their boarding clamps to the outer airlock. Sarah's hands flew over her controls, bringing the ship's defensive systems online. Well, that explains why they're so interested in keeping you alive, she muttered. Jake, I hope your repairs hold up under combat conditions, because we're about to find out how fast this old girl can really go. Combat conditions? Jake felt his adrenaline spike as the implications hit him. You mean we're going to fight our way out? Unless you've got a better idea, those troops aren't here to negotiate, and I'm not about to hand over a passenger to the Dominion. Sarah's expression was grim but determined. Besides, I've got a reputation to maintain. The Lucky Strike has never failed to complete a delivery, and I'm not about to start now. The bridge's tactical display lit up with warning indicators as more Dominion ships appeared on the station's perimeter. Jake counted at least 6 vessels, including what looked like a heavy cruiser that could probably reduce the Lucky Strike to scrap metal with a single volley. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I appreciate the sentiment, but this is looking like a suicide mission." "Trust me," Sarah replied with a grin that reminded Jake uncomfortably of his father's expression when he was about to attempt something spectacularly dangerous. "I've been running cargo through hostile space for 15 years. The trick isn't to be stronger than your enemies. It's to be smarter, faster, and more unpredictable." The ship's intercom crackled to life, broadcasting a message from the Dominion forces surrounding them. "Freighter Lucky Strike, this is Commander Voss of the Dominion Imperial Navy. You are harboring stolen property of the Empire. Surrender the Lyrian specimen immediately, and you will be permitted to depart unharmed." Sarah keyed the comm system, her voice dripping with false politeness. "Commander Voss, this is Captain Chen. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. We're just a humble cargo hauler trying to make an honest living." "Captain Chen, our sensors clearly indicate the presence of a Lyrian aboard your vessel. Do not attempt to deceive us. You have 60 seconds to comply, or we will board your ship by force." 60 seconds? Sarah glanced at Jake and Zara. "That's barely enough time to say goodbye. Lucky for us, I never was much good at following schedules." She killed the comm link and immediately activated the ship's emergency launch sequence. The Lucky Strike broke away from the docking clamps with a violent shudder that rattled every bolt in her superstructure, accelerating out of the docking bay at a speed that would have been reckless under normal circumstances and was probably suicidal given their current situation. "Jake," Sarah called out as she fought to keep the ship stable under the crushing acceleration. "I need you in the engine room. We're going to need every bit of power you can squeeze out of those drives." Jake unbuckled himself from his seat, despite the fact that the ship was currently pulling enough G-forces to make walking an exercise in applied physics. "What about Zara?" "I need the Lyrian up here with me. If what you said about that archive is true, then Zara might be our best hope of finding a way out of this mess." Jake made his way aft through corridors that seemed determined to throw him into every available bulkhead. The ship's inertial compensators were working overtime, but Sarah's aggressive maneuvering was pushing them well beyond their designed limits. The engine room was a symphony of mechanical stress, every system pushed to maximum output as the Lucky Strike fled from the Dominion forces. But Jake's recent repairs were holding beautifully, the hyperdrive humming with smooth efficiency even under the extreme conditions. "Computer," he called out to the ship's AI system, "give me a full system status report." "All primary systems operating within acceptable parameters," the synthetic voice replied. "However, I must advise that our current acceleration profile will result in structural failure within approximately 12 minutes if maintained." Jake grimaced. 12 minutes wasn't nearly enough time to reach the hyperspace jump point, especially with Dominion warships in pursuit. They needed another option, and they needed it fast. He activated the intercom to the bridge. "Sarah, how are we doing up there?" "We've got 4 ships on our tail, and they're gaining fast. The good news is we're staying ahead of their weapons' range. The bad news is that won't last much longer." "What about jumping to hyperspace?" "Still too close to the station's gravity well. We need another 8 minutes of normal space flight before we can make the jump safely." 8 minutes they didn't have. Jake stared at the engine readouts, his mind racing through possibilities. The hyperdrive was running perfectly, but it was still constrained by the fundamental physics of hyperspace navigation. You couldn't jump to hyperspace while inside a significant gravity field, and Nexus Station's mass was more than sufficient to create a dangerous interference pattern. Unless... "Computer, show me the current gravitational topology around the station." A holographic display materialized above the main console, showing Nexus Station and the surrounding space in 3 dimensions. The station's gravity well extended for several 100,000 kilometers in all directions, but the field wasn't uniform. There were gravitational eddies and null zones created by the station's rotation and the presence of multiple docked ships. Jake studied the display, looking for something that might give them an edge. There, near the station's polar axis where the rotational effects were minimal, was a narrow corridor of reduced gravitational interference. It was barely wide enough for a single ship to navigate, and it was guarded by a network of automated defense platforms, but it might be their only chance. Sarah, he called over the intercom. I've got an idea, but you're not going to like it. At this point, I'll try anything. What have you got? There's a navigation corridor near the station's north pole that might let us jump to hyperspace early. But it's defended, and the approach vector is going to require some very precise flying. Define very precise. Jake consulted the tactical display again, calculating approach angles and clearance margins. We'll need to thread the needle between 6 defense platforms while maintaining a heading that varies by no more than 0.3 degrees from optimal, and we'll have to do it while the Dominion ships are shooting at us. There was a long pause before Sarah's voice came back over the intercom. Jake, that's not very precise flying. That's impossible flying. Yeah, but it's the only chance we've got. Another pause, then Sarah's laughter echoed through the ship's corridors. Well, when you put it like that, how can I refuse? Zara, I hope your people have some kind of luck god, because we're about to need all the divine intervention we can get. The Lucky Strike changed course with a violence that would have been impressive in a fighter craft, and was simply terrifying in a cargo hauler. Sarah pushed the ship through a series of evasive maneuvers that managed to stay just ahead of the Dominion weapons fire, while gradually aligning them with the approach corridor Jake had identified. 30 seconds to the defense perimeter, Sarah announced. Jake, I need you to disable those platforms remotely. Think you can slice their targeting systems? Jake was already working on it, his hands flying over the engineering console as he attempted to penetrate the station's defensive network. Nexus Station's security was notoriously corrupt, but their automated systems were military-grade and not easily compromised. I can't get through their main firewall, he reported, but I might be able to create a feedback loop in their sensor array. Give me another 20 seconds. You've got 15. The first defense platform opened fire just as Jake managed to inject a virus into its targeting computer. The platform's weapons swiveled wildly, firing in random directions as its sensors fed it false target data. Jake quickly replicated the attack on the other platforms in the network, creating a corridor of confused automated defenses that were more dangerous to each other than to any passing ships. Got it, Jake announced as the last platform fell victim to his electronic warfare. You've got a clear corridor for the next 3 minutes before their systems reset. The Lucky Strike shot through the gap between the platforms like a bullet fired from a railgun. Sarah's flying was nothing short of miraculous, threading the ship between weapons emplacements and sensor arrays with clearances measured in meters rather than kilometers. But the Dominion ships were still in pursuit, and their commanders were proving to be frustratingly competent. Instead of following the Lucky Strike through the dangerous corridor, they split their formation, sending 2 ships to follow while the others moved to intercept them on the far side. Smart, Sarah muttered as she watched the tactical display. They're boxing us in. Even if we make it through the platforms, we'll still have 4 ships waiting for us on the other side. Jake felt the ship shudder as one of the pursuing Dominion vessels managed to score a glancing hit on their rear shields. The Lucky Strike was tough, but she wasn't a warship. A few more hits like that, and they'd be flying debris instead of a functioning spacecraft. On the bridge, Zara was watching the tactical display with an expression of deep concentration. The young Lyrian's empathic abilities were apparently picking up something that the ship's sensors couldn't detect. Sarah, Zara said quietly, the commander of the lead Dominion ship is afraid. Afraid, Sarah glanced back at the Lyrian. Of what? They've got us outnumbered and outgunned. Not of losing the battle, of losing me. I can feel his emotions from here, and he's terrified of what his superiors will do if I'm killed instead of captured alive. Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. That's it. Jake, can you reroute power from the life support systems to the shield generators? We don't need to defeat them, we just need to convince them that we might destroy ourselves rather than be captured. Jake was already working on it, transferring power from non-essential systems to strengthen their defensive capabilities. It was a risky gambit, reducing their life support reserves to dangerous levels, but it might buy them the time they needed. Done, he reported, but we've only got about 20 minutes of breathable air with the life support running at minimum levels. 20 minutes is all we need, Sarah replied grimly. She activated the ship's external communications array and broadcast on all frequencies. Attention Dominion forces, this is Captain Chen. Your pursuit has caused significant damage to our ship's containment systems. Continue your attack, and you risk destroying the very thing you're trying to capture. It was a bluff, but a believable one. The lucky strike was venting atmosphere from her recent damage, and her energy readings would support the claim that critical systems were failing. Jake watched the tactical display, holding his breath as the Dominion ships responded to the threat. The pursuing vessels immediately reduced their rate of fire, switching from direct attacks to warning shots designed to herd the fleeing freighter rather than destroy it. It bought them precious seconds, but it wasn't a permanent solution. "We're approaching the jump point," Sarah announced. "Hyperspace calculations are coming online now. Jake, please tell me your repairs are going to hold together for a jump to hyperspace." "They'll hold," Jake replied with more confidence than he felt. The hyperdrive was running smoothly, but hyperspace jumps were always stressful on a ship's systems, and they'd been pushing the lucky strike well beyond her normal operational limits. "Jump calculations complete," the ship's computer announced. "Hyperspace entry in 10 seconds. Jake felt the familiar sensation of reality beginning to shift around them as the hyperdrive spun up to full power. Space outside the viewports took on the strange, twisted appearance that preceded a jump to hyperspace, and the stars began to stretch into lines of light. 5 seconds, Sarah counted down. 4, 3, 2. The Dominion ships made one last desperate attempt to disable them, concentrating their fire on the Lucky Strike's engine section. Jake felt the ship buck and shudder as energy beams hammered their rear shields, but his repairs held firm, and the hyperdrive continued its countdown to activation. Jump. Reality twisted inside out, and the Lucky Strike vanished into the swirling chaos of hyperspace, leaving the Dominion ships behind in normal space with nothing but sensor echoes and the bitter taste of failure. Jake felt his knees buckle with relief as the immediate danger passed. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd escaped from Nexus Station and the Dominion forces that had been hunting them. But as the adrenaline began to fade, he realized that their troubles were far from over. "Where are we headed?" he asked Sarah as she began powering down the ship's combat systems. "The Kepler colony in the frontier territories, just like we discussed. It's a long jump, about 18 hours in hyperspace, but it'll put us well outside Dominion space." Jake nodded, then made his way back to the bridge where Zara was staring out at the hypnotic swirl of hyperspace with an expression of wonder and sadness. "You okay?" he asked, settling into the seat beside the young Lyrian. "I keep thinking about what Commander Voss said," Zara replied. "That I'm stolen property of the Empire. They actually believe they own me, own the memories and knowledge of my entire species." "They're wronged." "Are they? I'm the only one left who can access the Great Archive. What if that knowledge could help people, could advance medical science or solve energy problems? Don't I have some kind of obligation to share it?" Jake considered the question carefully. It was the kind of ethical dilemma that didn't have easy answers, the sort of problem that philosophers could debate for centuries without reaching a conclusion. "Here's what I think," he said finally. "You have the right to choose what you do with your abilities, not the Dominion, not some galactic council, not even well-meaning people like me. You get to decide whether to share that knowledge and with whom and on what terms. But what if I make the wrong choice? What if I keep the archive to myself and people die because I was too selfish to help them? And what if you share it and it gets used to build weapons that kill millions of people? There are no perfect choices here, Zara. There are only choices that you can live with." Zara was quiet for a long moment, processing Jake's words. Finally, the young Lyrian looked up at him with those remarkable violet eyes. "Will you help me figure it out? I've never had to make decisions this big before. I don't want to do it alone." Jake felt the warmth of their empathic bond strengthen, and he realized that his decision to help Zara had become something much deeper than simple altruism. Somehow, without quite understanding how it had happened, the young Lyrian had become the most important person in his life. "Yeah," he said softly, "we'll figure it out together." Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom, interrupting their conversation. "Jake, Zara, you might want to come up to the bridge. We're receiving a transmission on a very unusual frequency, and I think you're going to want to hear this." They made their way forward to find Sarah staring at her communication console, with an expression of bewilderment and growing excitement. "It's a message," she explained as they joined her. "Audio only on a frequency that shouldn't exist. The signal is somehow propagating through hyperspace, which is supposed to be impossible. Who's it from? Jake asked. That's the interesting part. The message is addressed to the last child of Lyros and her human guardian. It's specifically meant for you too. Jake and Zara exchanged glances, both of them feeling a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Who could possibly know about their escape from Nexus Station, and how could they be sending messages through hyperspace? Play it, Zara said finally. Sarah activated the playback system, and the bridge filled with a voice that was neither human nor any alien species Jake recognized. It was melodious and strange, with harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the listener's consciousness. Greetings, young Lyrian, and welcome to freedom. My name is Kethara, and I speak for the Guardians of the Lost. We have been waiting for you for a very long time. Jake felt Zara go rigid beside him, the young Lyrian's empathic abilities apparently detecting something significant about the voice. We know of your escape from the slave markets, and we know of the choice that now lies before you. The great archive of your people contains knowledge that could transform the galaxy for good or ill. The decision of how to use that knowledge will define not only your future, but the future of countless worlds. The voice paused, and Jake could hear something that might have been sadness in its strange harmonics. Your people were not the only ones to fall before the Dominion's hunger for conquest. We are the survivors and descendants of a dozen species that were destroyed or enslaved by the Empire's expansion. We have been working in secret for generations, gathering resources and allies, waiting for an opportunity to strike back at our oppressors. Jake's pulse quickened. This was starting to sound like recruitment for some kind of rebel organization. The knowledge contained in the Great Archive could provide that opportunity, but only if it is used wisely. We offer you sanctuary, protection, and the chance to help us build a future where no species will suffer as yours has suffered. Another pause, longer this time. If you choose to join us, alter your course to the coordinates we are transmitting now. If you choose a different path, we understand and respect your decision. But know that the Dominion will never stop hunting you as long as you remain the key to such valuable knowledge. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence except for the constant hum of the ship systems. Jake looked at the coordinate data that had been transmitted along with the message, nodding that it would require a significant course change and would take them even further from civilized space. What do you think? Sarah asked quietly. Jake looked at Zara, trying to read the young Lyrian's expression. It's your choice, he said. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Zara stared out at the swirling patterns of hyperspace, its violet eyes reflecting the strange lights that danced beyond the viewports. When it finally spoke, its voice was steady and determined. I think, Zara said slowly, that it's time I learned what it really means to be the last of my people. Set a course for those coordinates, Captain Chen. Let's see what these guardians have to offer. As Sarah began entering the new navigation data, Jake found himself wondering what they were getting themselves into. The voice had spoken of striking back at the Dominion, of using the Great Archive's knowledge as a weapon against tyranny. It sounded noble and dangerous in equal measure. But looking at Zara's face, seeing the hope and determination in those remarkable eyes, Jake realized that they'd already passed the point of no return. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and maybe, just maybe, they might actually be able to make a difference. The Lucky Strike adjusted her course through hyperspace, carrying her unlikely crew toward a destination none of them could have imagined when this journey began. Behind them lay a life of hiding and fear. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the possibility of something greater than any of them had dared to hope for. Jake settled back in his seat and tried to prepare himself for whatever was waiting at the end of their new course. He had a feeling that the real adventure was just beginning. The coordinates provided by the mysterious Kethara led them to a region of space that didn't appear on any standard navigation charts. According to the Lucky Strike's sensors, they were approaching a rogue planet, a world that had been ejected from its original star system and now drifted through the void between the stars. It was the kind of place that most spacers avoided, a dead world with no resources and no strategic value. Which, Jake reflected as they dropped out of hyperspace, made it the perfect place to hide a secret base. I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface, Sarah reported from the pilot's seat. Whatever's down there, it's definitely not natural. The viewports showed them a world shrouded in artificial aurora, great sheets of colored light that danced across the planet's atmosphere in patterns too regular to be random. As they watched, the lights began to pulse in a sequence that looked almost like a greeting. "Incoming transmission," Sarah announced. "Same frequency as before, but this time it's coming from the planet's surface." The voice of Cathara filled the bridge once again, but now Jake could hear additional harmonics in the speech pattern, as if multiple beings were speaking in perfect unison. "Welcome to Haven, last daughter of Lyros. Permission to land has been granted. Follow the beacon to landing bay 7. A navigation marker appeared on their sensors, guiding them toward what looked like a natural crater on the planet's northern continent. As they descended through the atmosphere, Jake began to make out structures hidden within the crater walls, camouflaged installations that blended seamlessly with the rocky terrain. "It's a city," Zara whispered, pressing close to the viewport. "An entire hidden city." Sarah was shaking her head in amazement as she guided the Lucky Strike toward the designated landing bay. "I've been flying through this sector for 15 years, and I never knew this place existed. The stealth technology alone must be worth a fortune." They touched down on a landing pad that emerged from what had appeared to be solid rock, the illusion dissolving as their ship's sensors penetrated the holographic camouflage. Around them, Jake could see other vessels of various designs and configurations, everything from sleek fighters to massive cargo haulers, all bearing the signs of modification and customization that marked them as belonging to beings who lived outside the bounds of conventional law. "Well," Sarah said as she powered down the ship's systems, "this should be interesting." A delegation was waiting for them at the bottom of the Lucky Strike's boarding ramp. Jake counted at least a dozen beings from various species, all of them wearing the kind of practical clothing that suggested they were more interested in function than fashion. But it was the figure at the front of the group that captured his attention. Cathara was tall and graceful, with features that seemed to combine elements from several different species. Its skin had a silvery, almost metallic sheen, and its eyes were large and multifaceted like those of an insect. When it spoke, Jake could see that its voice was produced by a complex arrangement of vocal chambers that allowed it to create the harmonic patterns he'd heard in the transmissions. "Welcome to Haven," Cathara said, inclining its head in a gesture of respect. "I am honored to finally meet the last of the Lyrians face to face." Zara stepped forward, and Jake could see that the young Lyrian was struggling to control its emotions. "You said you've been waiting for me? How long?" "My people have been watching for survivors of the Lyrian Holocaust for 3 years," Cathara replied. "We had begun to fear that none remained alive." "Why, what makes the Lyrians so important to your cause?" Cathara's expression grew grave. "Perhaps it would be better to show you. There are things here that will help you understand not only what we are fighting for, but why your survival represents hope for countless worlds." They were led through corridors carved from living rock, past chambers filled with equipment and technology that Jake didn't recognize. The beings they encountered along the way represented dozens of different species, all of them working together with a sense of common purpose that was impressive to witness. "How many people live here?" Sarah asked as they walked. "Haven is home to approximately 50,000 refugees and resistance fighters," Cathara replied. "We represent the survivors of 43 different species that have been conquered or destroyed by the Dominion over the past century." Jake whistled softly. "That's a lot of people with grudges against the Empire." "More than grudges," Cathara corrected. "We are fighting for the future of free civilization in this galaxy. The Dominion's expansion shows no signs of slowing, and their methods become more brutal with each conquest." They entered a vast chamber that took Jake's breath away. The ceiling stretched hundreds of meters overhead, supported by columns of crystal that pulsed with internal light. But it was what filled the chamber that truly amazed him. A three-dimensional holographic display showing the entire galaxy, with thousands of points of light marking star systems, trade routes, and political boundaries. "This is our strategic center," Cathara explained. "From here, we coordinate resistance activities across 40 sectors of space." Zara was staring at the display with wide eyes. "The red areas, those are all Dominion territories." "Conquered worlds, enslaved populations, strip-mined planets," Cathara confirmed. "The Empire has been expanding steadily for over a century, and they show no signs of stopping. At their current rate of conquest, they will control half the galaxy within 50 years. Jake studied the holographic galaxy, noting how the red areas seem to be spreading outward from a central core like an infection. What's your plan to stop them? Until now, we have been limited to small-scale operations. Rescue missions, intelligence gathering, occasional sabotage. We lack the technology and resources to mount a serious challenge to the Dominion's military might. Cathara turned to face Zara directly. That is where the Great Archive becomes significant. The knowledge contained within your people's collective memory could provide us with advances in energy manipulation, materials science, and defensive technologies that would level the playing field. You want to use it as a weapon, Zara said quietly. We want to use it to protect the innocent, Cathara corrected. The archive contains medical knowledge that could cure diseases affecting billions of beings, engineering principles that could provide clean energy to worlds ravaged by industrial exploitation, agricultural techniques that could end famine on a dozen different planets. Zara looked at Jake, seeking his perspective. What do you think? Jake considered the question carefully. I think the real question isn't whether to use the knowledge, but how to make sure it's used responsibly. What kind of safeguards would you put in place to prevent the archive's contents from being misused? Cathara's multifaceted eyes turned toward him with what looked like approval. A wise question, human. We propose the establishment of a governing council with representatives from all the free species. No single group would have access to the archive's most dangerous knowledge, and all applications would require unanimous approval. That sounds reasonable in theory, Sarah interjected. But what happens when someone decides they need that dangerous knowledge right now to save their people? How do you maintain those safeguards when you're fighting for survival? The question hung in the air, and Jake could see that Cathara didn't have an easy answer. It was the eternal dilemma of warfare. How do you fight monsters without becoming monstrous yourself? There are no perfect solutions, Cathara admitted finally. But the alternative is to allow the Dominion to continue their campaign of conquest and genocide. How many species will we allow to be destroyed while we debate the ethics of resistance? Zara moved to one of the crystal columns and placed its paw against the smooth surface. Immediately, the chamber filled with a soft harmonic resonance, and the holographic galaxy began to shift and change, showing the locations of former civilizations that had been wiped out by the Dominion's expansion. I can feel them, Zara whispered, tears flowing down its furred cheeks. All the lost worlds, all the extinct species, their pain is still here, embedded in the quantum structure of space itself. Jake moved to stand beside Zara, placing a gentle hand on the young Lyrian's shoulder. Through their empathic bond, he could feel an echo of what Zara was experiencing. The accumulated grief and rage of 43 different species, all united in their desire for justice and their determination to prevent others from sharing their fate. Zara, he said softly, you don't have to carry this burden alone. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together. The young Lyrian looked up at him with violet eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. I know what I have to do, Zara said quietly, but I'm going to need your help to do it right. Zara turned to face Cathara and the assembled representatives of the resistance. I will help you access the Great Archive, but on certain conditions. Name them. First, the knowledge will be shared freely with all species, not just your alliance. Medical advances, agricultural improvements, clean energy technologies, they belong to everyone who needs them. Cathara nodded, agreed. Second, any military applications must be approved by a council that includes representatives from non-combatant species. We will not become conquerors in the name of liberation. Also agreed. Third, I want Jake Morrison to be my official liaison and advocate. His judgment and moral compass have proven themselves trustworthy, and I need someone I can rely on to help me make the difficult decisions. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Zara, I'm honored, but I'm just a mechanic. I'm not qualified to make decisions that could affect entire civilizations. You're more than a mechanic, Zara replied firmly. You're someone who sees a person in trouble and helps them, regardless of the consequences to yourself. You're someone who fixes things that are broken and makes them work better than they did before. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need. Cathara's expression was thoughtful. The young Lyrian speaks wisdom. Will you accept this responsibility, Jake Morrison? Jake looked around the chamber at the faces of beings from dozens of different species, all of them united in their hope for a better future. He thought about the refugee children back on Nexus Station, about the countless worlds that were suffering under Dominion rule, about the possibility that they might actually be able to make a difference. "All right," he said finally. "I'll do it, but I have one condition of my own." "What is it?" Cathara asked. "I want Captain Chen to be part of this too. We're going to need experienced pilots and ship captains to transport relief supplies and coordinate rescue operations. Sarah's proven herself to be reliable and resourceful, and I trust her judgment." Sarah looked surprised but pleased. "Jake, you sure about this? We're talking about taking on an entire galactic empire." "Yeah, I'm sure. Besides, you said it yourself. The Lucky Strike has never failed to complete a delivery. This is just going to be the most important delivery of our lives." Cathara's harmonic voice filled the chamber with what sounded like joy. "Then it is settled. Welcome to the Guardians of the Lost, friends. Your arrival marks the beginning of a new chapter in our struggle for freedom." Over the following days, Jake found himself immersed in a crash course in galactic politics and strategic planning. The Guardians' operation was more sophisticated than he'd initially realized, with cells operating in dozens of star systems and a network of sympathizers that extended into the heart of Dominion space. But it was his work with Zara that proved most challenging and rewarding. The process of accessing the Great Archive required the young Lyrian to enter a deep meditative state, opening its consciousness to the collective memories of its entire species. Jake's role was to serve as an anchor, using their empathic bond to help Zara maintain stability while navigating the vast repository of Lyrian knowledge. The experience was unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. Through Zara's consciousness, he touched minds that had lived thousands of years ago, witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, and gained access to scientific principles that his species wouldn't discover for centuries. The medical applications alone could revolutionize healthcare throughout the galaxy, Dr. Alina Vasquez reported during one of their debriefing sessions. She had arrived on Haven 3 days after the Lucky Strike, having decided that her skills would be better used supporting the resistance than running a clinic on Nexus Station. And the energy manipulation techniques could provide clean power to every inhabited world, added Dr. Thos Kelvoran, a Xerian physicist who had been studying the archive's contents. "We're talking about the end of scarcity as a driving force in galactic politics." But Jake was most interested in the archive's insights into conflict resolution and social harmony. The Lyrians had developed sophisticated techniques for mediating disputes and building consensus among diverse groups, knowledge that would be invaluable in managing the Guardians' growing alliance. "Your people had something special," he told Zara during one of their evening walks through Haven's gardens. "Not just the empathic abilities, but a genuine understanding of how to build lasting peace." "It wasn't perfect," Zara replied. "We had our conflicts and disagreements like any species, but we learned early in our history that cooperation was more rewarding than competition, that understanding others was more valuable than defeating them. Think we can teach that to the rest of the galaxy?" Zara smiled, its violet eyes reflecting the artificial stars that provided light for the underground gardens. "I think we have to try. The alternative is watching the Dominion turn every world into a slave camp." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Cathara, whose harmonic voice carried an undertone of urgency. "I apologize for the interruption, but we have received intelligence that requires immediate action. The Dominion is planning a massive assault on the Kepler colony, the same destination where you were originally headed." Jake felt his blood run cold. How massive? 3 battle groups, approximately 60 ships. They intend to make an example of the colony to discourage other frontier settlements from harboring refugees. "When?" "The assault begins in 18 hours. Jake and Zara exchanged glances, both of them thinking the same thing. The Kepler colony was home to over 2 million civilians, most of them refugees and frontier families who had fled to the Outer Rim seeking freedom from oppressive governments. "What can we do to help them?" Zara asked. "Normally, nothing," Cathara admitted. "We lack the military strength to challenge 3 Dominion battle groups in open combat, but with the knowledge from the Great Archive, we might be able to level the playing field." Jake's mind was already racing through possibilities. What did you have in mind? The archive contains defensive technologies that could be adapted to protect the colony's population centers. Energy shields, automated defense systems, even techniques for disrupting Dominion targeting computers. The problem is implementation time. We would need to transmit the technical specifications to the colony and hope they have the resources to build the necessary equipment in less than a day. That's impossible, Sarah objected. Even with detailed plans, it takes weeks to build advanced defensive systems. Jake was thinking about his father's old workshop back on Earth, about the community of mechanics and engineers who had kept Detroit's factories running through sheer ingenuity and determination. Not impossible, he said slowly. Just difficult. Zara, how detailed are the archive's technical specifications? Are we talking about theoretical principles or actual construction blueprints? Construction blueprints, Zara confirmed. My people were very practical in their approach to technology. The archive doesn't just contain the theory behind their innovations, but step-by-step instructions for building and implementing them. Then it might work, but we'd need to get there ourselves to oversee the construction. Remote transmission isn't going to be enough for something this complex. Cathara's multifaceted eyes widened. You're proposing to travel to Kepler Colony while it's under imminent attack. I'm proposing to get there before the attack begins and make sure those people have a fighting chance, Jake corrected. The Lucky Strike is fast enough to make the journey in 12 hours if we push her hard. That gives us 6 hours to coordinate the colony's defenses. Jake, Sarah said carefully, you're talking about taking on 3 Dominion battle groups with improvised defensive systems built by civilian volunteers. That's not courage, that's suicide. Maybe, but those people deserve the chance to fight for their homes. And if the archive's technology works as advertised, we might actually be able to pull this off. Zara stepped closer to Jake, its empathic abilities allowing it to sense his determination and resolve. If Jake goes, I go too. The archive's defensive systems were designed to be operated by Lyrian empaths. Without me there to coordinate them, they won't reach their full potential. Jake started to object, unwilling to put Zara in such danger, but the young Lyrian cut him off with a gentle touch. We're partners, remember? We face things together. Besides, those colonists include families with children, refugees who fled the same kind of oppression that destroyed my people. I won't abandon them to the same fate my species suffered. Cathara was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of their proposal. If you succeed, if you can demonstrate the archive's defensive capabilities in actual combat, it will change everything. The knowledge that effective resistance is possible could inspire uprisings throughout Dominion space. And if we fail, Sarah asked. Then we honor your sacrifice and continue the fight, Cathara replied solemnly. But we will have tried to save those lives, and that is what separates us from our enemies. Jake looked at his companions. Sarah, the pilot who had risked everything to help strangers. Zara, the young Lyrian who carried the hopes of an extinct species. Alina, the doctor who had dedicated her life to healing others regardless of their ability to pay. They were an unlikely group of heroes, but they were all he had. All right, he said, let's go save a colony. The preparation for their departure was frantic, but efficient. The Guardians loaded the Lucky Strike with technical equipment, construction materials, and detailed plans for implementing the archive's defensive systems. Jake spent precious hours studying the specifications, trying to understand technologies that were centuries ahead of anything his species had developed. The key is the harmonic resonance field, Zara explained as they reviewed the plans together. Lyrian defensive systems weren't based on brute force, but on precise manipulation of energy frequencies. A small shield generator can protect a large area if it's properly tuned. And you can provide that tuning. I can interface directly with the systems through empathic contact. It's similar to what I did with the garden crystals, but on a much larger scale. As they prepared for departure, Cathara approached Jake with a small device that looked like a modified communicator. This is a quantum entanglement transmitter, the Resistance leader explained. Regardless of what happens at Kepler Colony, your experiences there will be transmitted back to Haven in real time. If you fall, we will learn from your sacrifice. If you succeed, we will know immediately and can begin implementing similar defenses throughout the frontier territories. Jake pocketed the device, hoping he wouldn't have occasion to use it. Cathara, if we don't make it back, make sure the archive's knowledge is shared widely. Don't let it become another tool for those in power to control those who aren't. You have my word, Cathara replied. The knowledge will be used to build, not to destroy, to heal, not to harm. The Lucky Strike lifted off from Haven under the artificial aurora of the rogue planet's atmosphere, carrying its crew toward what might be their last adventure. Jake sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the stars wheel past as Sarah pushed the ship's hyperdrive to its absolute limits. Behind them lay a hidden world full of hope and determination. Ahead lay a colony full of innocent people who were about to face the full fury of the Dominion Empire. And in the space between, three unlikely heroes prepared to discover whether the power of one extinct species' knowledge could stand against the military might of a galactic tyranny. The battle for Kepler Colony was about to begin, and with it, the next chapter in the galaxy's struggle for freedom.